one of the most contagious diseases known to humans. In fact, if one person has measles, up to 90% of people around them who aren't immune will also become infected. The measles virus has been around for thousands of years, but it wasn't until 1963 that the first measles vaccine was developed. This was a game changer in public health, and we'll talk more about that later in the video. Let's talk about transmission. Measles spreads through respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs, sneezes, talks, or even breathes. These tiny droplets can hang in the air for up to 2 hours after the infected person has left the room. That's right, you don't even need to be in direct contact with someone to catch measles. The virus can also survive on surfaces for several hours, though airborne transmission is the primary route. What makes measles particularly dangerous is that infected people are contagious for about 4 days before their rash appears and 4 days after. This means they're spreading the virus before they even know they're sick. The incubation period, that's the time between exposure and symptom onset, is typically 10 to 14 days, though it can range from 7 to 21 days. Now let's break down the symptoms and stages of measles infection. Measles progresses through several distinct phases. The first stage is called the prodromal phase, which begins about 10 to 14 days after exposure. During this phase, patients develop what we call the 4 C's: cough, coryza, that's a runny nose, conjunctivitis or red watery eyes, and generally feeling crummy. Fever is also common during this stage, often reaching 104 fever or higher. About 2 to 3 days into the prodromal phase, you might notice something called Koplik spots. These are small white or bluish white spots with red backgrounds that appear inside the mouth, typically on the inner cheeks. These spots are actually pathognomonic for measles, meaning they're a definitive sign of the disease. The second stage is when the characteristic rash appears, usually 3 to 5 days after symptoms begin. The rash starts at the hairline and behind the ears, then spreads downward across the face, neck, and eventually the entire body. The rash consists of flat, red spots that may merge together as it spreads. While many people think of measles as just a childhood illness with a rash, the reality is that measles can cause serious complications, especially in certain vulnerable populations. Common complications include ear infections, which occur in about 10% of cases, and diarrhea, which affects about 8% of patients. Pneumonia is more serious and occurs in about 6% of cases. It's actually the most common cause of death from measles in young children. Measles as just a childhood illness with a rash. The reality is that measles can cause serious complications, especially in certain vulnerable populations. Common complications include ear infections, which occur in about 10% of cases, and diarrhea, which affects about 8% of patients. Pneumonia is more serious and occurs in about 6% of cases. It's actually the most common cause of death from measles in young children. Brain complications are particularly concerning. Encephalitis or brain inflammation occurs in about 1 in 1,000 cases and can lead to permanent brain damage. There's also a rare but fatal condition called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, or SSPE, which can develop years after the initial measles infection. Certain groups are at higher risk for severe complications. These include children under 5 years old, adults over 20, pregnant women and people with compromised immune systems. Vitamin A deficiency also increases the risk of severe measles. Let's talk about who's most at risk for measles infection. Anyone who isn't immune to measles can get infected, but some groups are particularly vulnerable. Infants under 12 months old are at high risk because they're too young to receive the measles vaccine and may not have protective antibodies from their mothers. International travellers who visit countries where measles is still common are also at increased risk. People with compromised immune systems, such as those undergoing cancer treatment, taking immunosuppressive medications, or living with HIV, are not only more likely to catch measles, but also more likely to develop severe complications. Interestingly, healthcare workers are also considered a high-risk group due to their potential exposure to infected patients. This is why vaccination requirements are often stricter for healthcare professionals. How do healthcare providers diagnose measles? While the characteristic rash and symptoms can be quite distinctive, laboratory confirmation is usually necessary, especially given how rare measles has become in many countries, thanks to vaccination programs. The most common test is a blood test that looks for measles-specific antibodies. There are two main types: IgM antibodies, which appear early in the infection, and IgG antibodies, which develop later and provide long-term immunity. Healthcare providers can also test throat swabs, nasal swabs, or urine samples using a technique called RT-PCR, which detects the genetic material of the measles virus. This test is particularly useful in the early stages of infection. Now, here's something important to understand. There's no specific antiviral treatment for measles. Treatment is what we call supportive care, which means managing symptoms and preventing complications while the immune system fights off the virus. For most people, this means getting plenty of rest, staying hydrated, and taking fever reducers like acetaminophen or ibuprofen. It's important to avoid aspirin in children due to the risk of Reye syndrome. Vitamin A supplementation is recommended by the World Health Organization, especially for children in developing countries or those with vitamin A deficiency. Studies have shown that vitamin A can reduce the severity of measles and lower the risk of complications. For people who have been exposed to measles but haven't developed symptoms yet, there are some options. The measles vaccine can sometimes prevent infection if given within 72 hours of exposure. For people who can't receive the vaccine, immune globulin injections may provide temporary protection if given within 6 days of exposure. This brings us to the most important part of our discussion: prevention. The MMR vaccine, that's measles, mumps and rubella, is the best protection against measles. This vaccine is incredibly effective, with 2 doses providing about 97% protection against measles. The standard vaccination schedule calls for the first dose at 12 to 15 months of age and the second dose at 4 to 6 years of age. Adults who are born in 1957 or later and don't have evidence of immunity should receive at least 1 dose of MMR vaccine. The vaccine contains live, weakened viruses that stimulate the immune system to produce protective antibodies without causing the actual diseases. It's been extensively studied and has an excellent safety profile. Some people cannot receive the MMR vaccine, including pregnant women, people with severely compromised immune systems, and those with certain allergies. These individuals rely on community immunity, also known as herd immunity, for protection. Let's talk more about herd immunity because it's crucial for understanding how we protect entire communities from measles. Herd immunity occurs when a high percentage of a population is immune to a disease, making it difficult for the disease to spread from person to person. For measles, we need about 95% of the population to be immune to maintain herd immunity. This high threshold is due to measles being so incredibly contagious. When vaccination rates drop below this level, outbreaks can occur, and they often affect the most vulnerable members of our communities: infants too young to be vaccinated, people with compromised immune systems, and those who cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons. We've seen this play out in real-world scenarios. In recent years, several countries that had previously eliminated measles have experienced outbreaks when vaccination rates declined. This underscores the importance of maintaining high vaccination coverage. Measles elimination has been one of the great success stories of public health. Before the measles vaccine was introduced in 1963, measles infected 3 to 4 million people annually in the United States alone, causing about 500 deaths each year. The World Health Organization has made measles elimination a global priority. Between 2000 and 2018, measles vaccination prevented an estimated 23.2 million deaths worldwide. Several regions, including the Americas, have achieved measles elimination status. However, progress has stalled and even reversed in some areas. Global measles cases increased by 556% in the first quarter of 2019 compared to the same period in 2018. This resurgence has been attributed to several factors, including vaccine hesitancy, healthcare system challenges, and conflicts that disrupt vaccination programs. I want to address some common concerns people have about the measles vaccine because misinformation can be dangerous when it comes to public health. One of the most persistent myths is the false claim linking the MMR vaccine to autism. This claim originated from a fraudulent study published in 1998 that was later retracted due to serious ethical and methodological flaws. The lead author lost his medical license and numerous large-scale studies involving millions of children have found no link between the MMR vaccine and autism. Some people worry about vaccine ingredients. The MMR vaccine contains weakened live viruses, a small amount of sugar and amino acids to keep the viruses stable, and a tiny amount of an antibiotic called neomycin to prevent bacterial contamination. The amounts of these ingredients are extremely small and well within safety limits. Side effects from the MMR vaccine are generally mild and much less serious than the complications that can result from measles infection. Common side effects include mild fever, rash, or soreness at the injection site. Serious adverse reactions are extremely rare. Let's look at some recent measles outbreaks to understand what happens when vaccination rates decline. In 2019, the United States experienced its largest measles outbreak since measles was declared eliminated in 2000, with over 1,200 cases reported. Many of these outbreaks occurred in communities with lower vaccination rates, often due to philosophical or religious objections to vaccination. The outbreak spread rapidly through schools, daycare centers, and other places where unvaccinated children gathered. One outbreak in New York City's Orthodox Jewish community resulted in over 600 cases and led to the declaration of a public health emergency. The outbreak was initially sparked by travelers returning from Israel, where a large outbreak was ongoing. These outbreaks serve as stark reminders of how quickly measles can spread in unvaccinated populations and why maintaining high vaccination coverage is so important. They also highlight the global nature of measles transmission. In our interconnected world, an outbreak anywhere can potentially affect communities everywhere. There are some special considerations for certain populations when it comes to measles and vaccination. Pregnant women who aren't immune to measles face increased risks, including premature labour and low birth weight babies. However, the MMR vaccine cannot be given during pregnancy because it contains live viruses. Women who are planning to become pregnant should ensure they're immune to measles before conception. If they're not immune, they should receive the MMR vaccine and wait at least 1 month before trying to conceive. Healthcare workers deserve special mention because they're at increased risk of exposure and can potentially spread measles to vulnerable patients. Most healthcare facilities require evidence of measles immunity for all staff members. International travellers should also take special precautions. If you're planning to travel internationally, especially to areas where measles is still common, make sure you're up to date on your measles vaccinations. Infants who will be travelling internationally may need to receive their first MMR dose earlier than usual. Looking ahead, what does the future hold for measles control? The good news is that we have the tools we need to eliminate measles worldwide. We have a highly effective vaccine that provides long-lasting immunity. The challenge is ensuring that vaccine reaches everyone who needs it. New vaccine delivery strategies are being developed, including more heat-stable formulations that don't require refrigeration, making it easier to deliver vaccines in resource-limited settings. Researchers are also working on combination vaccines that could provide protection against multiple diseases with fewer injections. Surveillance systems are becoming more sophisticated, allowing public health officials to detect and respond to outbreaks more quickly. Genetic sequencing of measles viruses helps track transmission patterns and identify outbreak sources. Technology is also playing a role, with electronic immunisation registries making it easier to track vaccination coverage and identify communities at risk. So what can you do to help prevent measles? First and foremost, make sure you and your family are up to date on measles vaccinations. Check with your healthcare provider if you're unsure about your vaccination status. If you're a parent, follow the recommended vaccination schedule for your children. The vaccines are timed to provide. While there's no specific treatment for measles, it's almost entirely preventable through vaccination. The MMR vaccine is safe, effective, and provides long-lasting immunity. 2 doses provide about 97% protection against measles. Maintaining high vaccination coverage is crucial, not just for individual protection, but for community protection through herd immunity. When vaccination rates drop, outbreaks can occur, putting the most vulnerable members of our communities at risk. Recent outbreaks around the world remind us that measles hasn't gone away. It's always ready to return when we let our guard down. But the good news is that we have the tools to prevent measles. Vaccination programs have prevented millions of deaths and could eventually eliminate measles from the world entirely. The key message I want you to take away from this video is that measles is serious, but it's preventable. Make sure you're protected, protect your family, and support efforts to protect your community. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might benefit from this information. Subscribe to our channel for more health education content and hit that notification bell so you'll know when we upload new videos. Do you have questions about measles or vaccines that we didn't address today? Leave them in the comments below and we'll do our best to answer them or consider them for future videos. Remember, when it comes to your health and your family's health, always consult with qualified healthcare providers that can give you personalised advice based on your specific situation and medical history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay healthy.